So if the local government creates speeding fines within its boundaries, within its city borders, and then the state creates speeding fines for all roads, then the local ordinance cannot conflict with that state code. And go further, so if the state law simply says all roads must have at least a 10-mile-per-hour speed limit, well then the local ordinance might make it 15, 20, might make it 5 miles per hour on some roads, and it would be fine. But if it tried to make 20, 30, or 40 mile per hour roads, then it would be in violation of the state law, conflicting that law, and therefore would not be valid. So when we're talking about local ordinance, you first have to look to the state to see what the state allows the local governments to do, and then finally whether or not the local governments are abiding by those rules and not conflicting any state laws. Another area where crimes can exist is administratively. I hesitate to call these crimes, but you can have violations of administrative laws. Administrative laws originate from state statutes. They're the regulatory body that puts forth, that affects, actually creates the laws that we use. They derive that power directly from the statute that's passed. So administrative laws might be a regulation. Let's say the IRS comes up with a regulation that you have to pay your taxes in this specific way, and if you don't, then you're evading paying taxes and must pay a $10,000 fine. That would be an administrative crime. It's, again, I like to refer to those more as violations, but indeed they could rise to the level of committing a crime. You're actually committing the crime of disobeying the statutory law that was created by Congress, and that then created the administrative agency to regulate how things are done. So we already looked at case law, judge-made law, also known as common law. That's created by judges interpreting codes. So for instance, you have a statute that says arson is the burning of a building. You know, typical legislature leaves a lot to be desired. Okay, how do you detect whether or not something is burned? Is it that there was a match there? What if no damage was done? So that's where the court might come in, look at the law, look at how the law came about, and say, well, you know what, I don't think the legislature meant to criminalize burning when that burning doesn't actually cause any damage. So they'll interpret it as such, and then it becomes part of the common law. So now arson doesn't just mean arson is the burning of a building. It now means arson is the burning of a building, comma, so long as damage has been done. And then you would look at the case to see exactly what the judge said. You also have judges interpreting their own laws, what they've previously handed down, and that's known as stare decisis. meaning that courts like to follow their own rules. They don't want to seem arbitrary. So when they come down with something, they'll generally follow it. It's very rare that a court will up and do something completely different. I have a slide regarding the federal system. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. As I mentioned, the federal government, the federal government by itself has limited lawmaking authority when it comes to crimes. Washington, D.C. has its own criminal code, and of course the states have their own criminal code as well. So now let's look at punishment. Criminal punishment. When we're talking about criminal punishment, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is incarceration. Incarceration. Confinement. Putting someone in jail. When we talk about rate of incarceration, we're talking about is the number of prisoners per 100,000 people. That's the rate of incarceration. The United States is the leader in incarceration. We like to put a lot of people in prison. And we can learn things from those statistics, and that's part of criminal justice. And we're not going to touch too much upon that, in that we're just looking at the legal aspect, not so much the statistics and facts and figures. When we're generally talking about punishment, we're talking about pain, something unpleasant. And this is a no-brainer definition. Punishment, inflicting pain or some sort of discomfort, something unpleasant. We're doing it to another. Generally, I guess in a general sense you could punish yourself, but when we think about crimes, and we'll talk about criminal punishment in a second, we're generally talking about punishing another. So what about criminal punishment? We're doing the exact same thing. We're inflicting pain or something unpleasant to another. It's defined by the law. It's administered by the state, and it's administered intentionally. You don't just randomly pick someone and say, "Oh, I don't like that car there. Jail." That's not how it works. We're talking about someone who is being punished pursuant to a specific statute in a specific way that is depicted in the statute, and then we're intentionally incarcerating or criminally punishing that person as it's defined. The the book mentions the difference between punishment and treatment. And there is a big difference. The law in our country focuses on punishment for the most part. Treatment is left out to the sidelines for the criminally insane, but generally not for prisoners. You might have some rehabilitation features inside of a prison, but the general idea here is away from treatment and more toward just punishing an individual for their crimes. Now, why have criminal punishment? Why have criminal punishment? Retribution and prevention. You want to have that eye for an eye mentality. You want to inflict pain upon those who are inflicting pain on others. The crime justifies itself through the pain that the offender has caused on the victim. The prevention aspect of it is the pain of the punishment will prevent further infliction of harm. So it is what it says. When it comes to criminal punishment, we're trying to prevent. We don't want more infliction of pain upon someone innocent in the public. We do that through inflicting pain on the offender. We want retribution. We want the offender to feel the pain that he has caused the victim. Some ideas behind retribution, and I believe the book mentions Sir James Stephen, looks at retribution as a moral imperative. A moral imperative. It's morally right to hate criminals. And this, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because this goes a little beyond what the law is concerned about and more toward policy. Should we hate criminals? That's for the policymakers to decide. From a legal standpoint, all we care about is there a crime? Why is there a crime? And how do we want to deal with the crime? If we start talking about moral imperatives, then we sort of go backwards in time as far as natural law and law that just comes from the ether, rather than law that protects one another from others who are trying to injure you or your state. When it comes to retribution as well, we're talking about accepting responsibility. Accepting responsibility for your actions. With retribution, and this concept, again, I'm sure you're going to talk more about this in your other criminal justice classes, but the concept of free will comes up a lot. With retribution, we think it's okay to punish another for their